It's January once again, which means West Ham are going to be linked with every striker under the sun. And going through and figuring out who's actually worth signing when we get linked to Gimenez and Guirassy and any other rogue shouts and who isn't feels like an impossible task when you're alone. Thankfully, I'm not. I am joined by co-founder of Analytics United, Jack Elderton. He's a West Ham tactics writer, and co-founder of Analytics United, Cal Goodall. He's a data virtuoso to break down these strikers and see who's who, who's good, who's not, and also, for a little cheeky bonus plug out there for Hamalytics on Patreon as well while we're at it. But boys, how are we? I want you to both answer in one word in unison. How are you in 3, 2, 1?
Sound.
Good.
Okay.
I was going to go with good as well, and then I thought I'd switch it up.
Wasn't quite in unison either. Maybe in editing I'll shove it together so it sounds better of you. But let's start with Santiago Gimenez. We've had Mexican strikers before. Let's talk about him. I'm not going to lie. He was good clickbait a couple of days ago. He's probably going to be on the thumbnail again. What are we saying? Who wants to start?
Go on, Cal.
Yeah, I can kick it off. He's been linked to a lot of clubs. He's been linked to a lot of clubs for a while, really, on account of his very good form in the Eredivisie for Feyenoord. And he's continued that form this season, both in the league and also in Europe as well. And he's scored 21 goals and put on 5 assists so far this season across both competitions. I think there's every right for him to be linked to all these clubs. There's a lot of excitement, largely because of how prolific he has been. And I think it's trended in the right direction for him as well. I think earlier in his career, when he was playing for Cruz Azul in Mexico, he wasn't the most prolific, and there was concerns of whether he would actually ever kick on. But his goal tally gradually climbed up, and then I think it was last season he scored 5 goals in 5 games right at the start of the Mexican season, and that was enough to prompt Feyenoord to pull the trigger. And since then, he's really grown into his role there. I think, there's some question marks with regards to how his fit would be at West Ham. I think stylistically, he is undoubtedly a very efficient finisher. He's very much he comes alive around the box, both in the box in terms of his sort of intelligence of his movement, whether that's blind spot runs, whether that's runs towards the near post, and the timing of that movement is what allows him to consistently outperform his XG, but also put in high XG numbers because he's consistently finding himself in high quality scoring opportunities. You marry that with his ability to find the back of the net, and it's a good marriage. But I think in other facets of his game, particularly if we think of it in a West Ham context and what we would require him to do in our current system, I think there are elements that I would be less convinced by. Notably, I think his hold-up play around the box it's not awful, but it's been questionable, I would say. There's moments when there's physicality demanded of him, when the ball's fired into his feet and he's backing up against the centre-back, and he doesn't often come out on top in those battles, I wouldn't say. His touch can be loose when under pressure from behind, and I think that can often and has often led for Feyenoord to the occasional counter against the side. Obviously, Feyenoord are one of the best sides in that league and often have higher number of possession than we do at West Ham, unsurprisingly perhaps for some. But yeah, that often means when he's losing the ball around the edge of the box and the opposition team are able to put a few passes together, they can find themselves quickly in a counter-attacking situation. If you then bleed that over to the Premier League, where the quality of the opposition that he will be facing is a lot higher, the likelihood of us being caught out in those situations is obviously far more risky. But yeah, I think he is undoubtedly a good striker. I just think stylistically, he's probably not the best fit for us. Bizarrely, I could actually see him slotting in at a higher level than West Ham, despite me saying that I don't think he'd be the best fit for us. And I think that's because in a more possession-based team where there's going to be more chances for him to score, where they're going to create chances at a higher regularity, and he's able to park himself around the box and constantly buzz around and occupy those positions, he's going to do well because he's going to get the service. But at West Ham, in our current system, he's obviously going to be asked to score the same amount from far fewer chances and have a lot more of a physical battle in terms of the way that he's asked to take the ball down from long balls or to battle those centre backs and carry towards the goal. And I just haven't seen that in his game so far. That doesn't mean to say he can't develop it, but I just think it would be a bit of a risk. And we have seen recently that the transition from the Eredivisie to the Premier League has proved challenging for some players, but not for Mohamed Kudus.
I don't think that's entirely unfair. I mean, it's something I often get heard said about Agerd a little bit. Like, there's this talk of Agerd leaving at the moment, and a lot of what I hear about it is, do you know what? He might not be the perfect guy for West Ham right now, but he could very easily play for a Champions League club and not look out of place. So I don't think it's necessarily unfair to label anyone else like that. Jack, what about you? What are you thinking about Gimenez?
I think he's very obviously a good player. I watched finals game against Lazio today to prepare for the show, and I mean, he clearly comes alive around the box and is super threatening in those areas. His movement is pretty exceptional, I would say, and he's clearly very clinical as well. So when you're talking about him thriving off fewer chances, in that sense, I think he could do quite well. I think it's more the rest of what you need to put together to be a successful striker under David Moyes at West Ham, and there are question marks there, as Cal said, around his physicality. I don't think it's that he's not strong or that he's not aggressive. I think he's quite clearly both of those things. I just think a lot of what I've been looking for when looking for strikers is, whether players are in control of the duels with the centre backs or not, or whether centre backs are able to get the upper hand in those moments and pressurise in a way that upsets the striker's rhythm. And Gimenez doesn't look completely secure of himself in those situations where he's touch tight to centre backs. He's good when he can create separation, and we'll talk about other players like that today. But under tons of pressure, he has to be secure on the ball, and that's not always there. One thing I would say that is in the positive column for him, though, is that we often see strikers at West Ham drifting out wide and rotating with other players, and Gimenez does definitely do that. He likes to move into the wide spaces and receive there, with wingers coming through into the centre and creating room for other players to make runs. So if you think about some of the players we do have at West Ham, like Kudus or Bowen, thriving when those strikers make movements to create space in the center of the pitch, he would be able to do that. So there are some really nice pluses for him. I just think when you look at the price tag, when you look at the reputation he's already developed, you're really hoping for kind of a full package kind of player who can step in at West Ham without too harsh an adjustment. And we've already seen how this can go wrong with Scamacca, where you sign someone who's at, a high level, playing really well, has had a really nice development curve and has good potential. But the adjustment is going to be big, and how that can really fall apart. And I can see a similar issues potentially arising for him. That's where he would maybe be more comfortable, as Cal said, stepping into a team who play a higher possession style and can create more opportunities for him around the box and dominate games a little bit better than West Ham can.
Well, then let's move on to a rogue shout then. And I'm not going to lie, not even going to try and pronounce it correctly. Mamouche is how I've gone with. Cal, describe him to me, because I'll be honest with you, I know basically nothing about this one.
In a nutshell, tall, quick, clinical, but maybe more of a winger than a striker, I think is probably a fair assessment. I think a lot of his strengths, both in terms of where he's actually often been deployed, is out on that left channel. He sort of floats. He's kind of either played as a 9 or a sort of goal-scoring left winger. And I think a lot of his strengths in respect of his ball carrying, in terms of his top speed, he's 6 foot, and once he gets going at a canter, he really is quite quick. And I think there's an obvious plus there in the context of a West Ham side who like to hit on the counter, is that if you can get the ball into his feet and he can find the space to run into, then he can look pretty unstoppable once he's got that yardage to run into. But I think the issue is that when it's not played into his feet, it's a lot more difficult for him. And we also historically are maybe not the best at playing the ball into the feet of the striker, and instead asking them to do a lot of it on their own. And I think that's something that I've not seen loads of for him. I think his link-up play around the box has been pretty nice in terms of spotting rotations. He obviously plays for Frankfurt at the minute and has again, another player who's had a nice development curve. And I think anyone that can think back, albeit it's under a different manager, the rotations of that Frankfurt side when we played them, there was a lot of going on. There was a lot of underlaps and overlaps. And I think Mamouche, having been in that system for a little while now, has probably started to pick that up and yeah, doesn't look out of his depth in that respect. But I think there are some concerns about, despite him being 6 foot, he's very much of the slight build, I would say. And I think in terms of his upper body strength, like I say, when he's carrying into space, he's fine, because it's difficult for defenders to catch him when they're backpedaling. But when he's trying to burst past a man, if he's not relying on his speed, but he's relying on his upper body strength, I think he's not really got that, I don't know how to describe it, the stiff arm sort of approach, in terms of where you hold off the defender and power past them, basically. An Antonio trademark, I would say. And I haven't seen that. So again, it's raising similar question marks. I think Marmoush is probably closer to the type of profile that I would want in this side. And I think he has everything there to develop into that. But again, like Jack was saying earlier, I think we're in a position where we want someone to come in, at least to my mind, to be able to come in and almost hit the ground running. Really, that's the position we find ourselves in with the current state of the squad and the injuries that are cropping up and stuff. And I think with Marmoush, you'd be asking a lot of someone who is still relatively early in their career. He is 24, but I think in terms of him bursting onto the scene, it happened later than some what you'd describe as a wonder kid, I guess, who you might expect to step up at 18 or whatever. It's only really now that he's really starting to establish himself as a real top player. And I think he'll go on to be great. And if we were looking to bring in someone as a development project, I would say, who can come in and impact the game when it's asked of him and then turn into that top player, I think that he could be a very feasible option. In fact, I'd really be on board with it. I rate Marmoush highly, but I just don't know if that's what we're looking for in this market.
Yeah, it's interesting because he's someone who, like, I barely know anything about. I've only really started to be aware of him this season at all. We've bought people from Frankfurt before. We've had interest there before. Jack, is this someone who you could see doing better than that last guy we did, or is this another one of them ones?
I really like Marmoush. I think, Cal didn't mention, but he's someone we've had on our radar for a long time at Analytics United. We've been tracking him for quite a while. It's interesting, actually, because a lot of the way that we might initially filter for strikers is using data and trying to use that to establish who the best targets for us might be. And one of the things that's maybe been challenging with that data over the last couple of seasons and looking for strikers that can perform the kind of role that Antonio does is that we often see sort of half winger, half striker types popping up in the sample a lot. So, for example, someone that's just about to get a move, by the looks of the news today, Geraldo Becker popped up at the very top of our list for a long time. Looks like he's getting a move to Real Sociedad this window. But another player who maybe is a little bit slighter, very dynamic, very good on the break, but as soon as you put them through the middle as the lone number 9, suddenly a lot of questions sort of start to appear in your head because you think of them more as a sort of inside forward who can maybe do a job in a front 2. I think of Marmoush quite similarly. I suppose the difference between him and Becker is that Marmoush is maybe earlier in his career and is already quite big. So I think he potentially could transition into quite a good lone 9. The other thing I would say on this is just that some of these players, when they're in that kind of style, who maybe are more comfortable being a sort of winger coming into the center of the pitch or playing in a front 2, I do wonder whether these are players that could end up being quite good as your sort of Bowen backup options and fulfilling that role in the squad a little bit more. The issue is you don't want to kind of find someone who's in the corner zone, who's neither one thing nor the other. And that's the problem, I think, with these kinds of players. And for Marmoush definitely falls into that. For me, it's very difficult to work out exactly which role would be right for him. Just on him, in terms of his game, I think the only thing I would mention that clearly was a concern for me is exactly the same as it was with Santiago Gimenez. It's that separation again. So if he's able to create the gap between himself and the centre backs, I think he's an outstanding player, and I think he will be really great in situations where he's not coming up against centre backs that are all over him. When he has to deal with receiving whilst pushing the defense back on the last line, I don't think that's necessarily his game. I think it's too easy to upset him physically. And I've been watching quite a lot of Marmoush footage over the last few days, and there were several games where the centre back seemed to work out that if you just kick him, he doesn't like it, and then he'll run away from you rather than continually trying to receive on the last line. That would be a problem in the Prem, I think, because centre-backs are wise to that already and will start the game really aggressively, putting that physical pressure on. And if he doesn't like that battle, if he doesn't want that battle, it's not that he's not aggressive, he is. I mean, there was a situation where he immediately got a yellow card by smashing the player that had kicked him, but he has to do it the right way, and I'm not sure he's quite got that level of experience as a lone number 9 who has to fulfill a sort of target man role at times. But yeah, great player. I think he's going to be really, really good. He's got a big future ahead of him, and if people want to watch him, you can. He's playing at AFCON right now for Egypt. I think he's more of a sort of impact sub for them because they've got a very subtle front three that's done very well for them. But yeah, one to keep an eye on for sure.
I think just before we move on to the next player, I think one thing that I will add that Jack's kind of reminded me of, and I think it kind of is reminiscent of an early Antonio, I think, in the sense that whilst I agree that Marmoush can be guilty of sort of shying away from that battle and instead sort of to drop a little deeper and receive, whether that's between the midfield and the defence or whether it's slightly further out into the left-hand channel and receive the ball there, just because that's where the space is and he feels more comfortable receiving with space around him. One benefit that does come from that, which is something that we used to see from Antonio, is that once he is in that position, he's very effective at getting to the byline and putting in cutbacks. In terms of the accuracy of his passing into the penalty area, he actually ranks in the 96th percentile this season for passing into the penalty area. So, and similarly, he ranks in, I think, the 89th percentile for expected assists. And his assist tally doesn't match up to that, but that's more so the fault of the attackers that are around him and not finishing the chances that he's putting on the plate for them. So I think in that respect, he might struggle in terms of, like Jack says, being that sort of focal point number 9 and expect him to come in and be prolific in that role. But what he might do in that role is drift out like Antonio used to, facilitate space and create space for the likes of Bowen. If you think of Marmoush drifting into that left channel, dragging the defence and shifting them over and then creating that space at the far post or in the middle of the box for Bowen, Kudus, anyone to run into, and then playing that cutback and scoring goals that way. So it's not necessarily that he would come in and be the prolific guy, but I think in terms of being a facilitator of the attacking players around him, I think there is a strength to his game in that respect.
Yeah, I'm just going to add as well, sorry, before we move on, but if there's a squad gap for that sort of third player who you want to put into that rotating cast with Bowen, Kudus, and one more, dependent on what happens with Paquetá, he would be very, very high up the list for me for that kind of role. Obviously, we're talking about number 9s today and players that we want to come in for that. Maybe he's a little bit lower down there for me, but in that kind of flexible forward who you want to kind of take up what Maxwell Cornet was meant to do at West Ham, I think you'd struggle to find many better options than Marmoush.
100%.
Well, the last person we mentioned in the intro, Guirassy, Stuttgart, we've been linked to him pretty non-stop. Lots of talk about him, not only just us, to be fair. There's lots of other clubs interested. Obviously, he's scoring a lot of goals. He's putting in the net fairly frequently at the moment, it feels like, and everyone's taking notice and talking about him a lot. Who wants to start with Guirassy? Cal, do you want to go again? Let's talk about him, because again, it's someone who wasn't too much on my radar before this season again, really, if I'm being honest.
Well, I'm not sure he was on many people's radars, to be fair. I think he's at least been known as a decent striker even before he was at Stuttgart. But I don't think anyone would have anticipated him reaching this level this season. It's an extreme level. Like, he's up there with Kane. I think he's only second to Kane, I think, for goals in the Bundesliga this season, I believe, or at least it was the case last time I checked. But yeah, he's been tearing it up. And I think of the 3 strikers we've discussed today, I think he is undoubtedly the most complete and, for my money, the most capable candidate to come in and slot in and do a job straight away. I think he's incredibly well-rounded. I think his hold-up play is exceptional. I think something that I've seen him add to his game this season that I really didn't think he had in his locker, but the sort of hold-up play, but then facilitation play as well, to just thread those little balls in behind onto the runners is just nuts. Like, I wrongly sort of just had him down previously as a sort of clinical finisher with good back to goal play and just sort of hold it up and wait. But in terms of like playing little back heels in or little fancy flicks and stuff, like, it kind of looks weird when he does it as well, because he's such a physical presence on the pitch that you just like, he's got such deft touch now. All of a sudden, it's just come out of nowhere. But yeah, his development's been great. But before I carry on, I'll kick over to Jack, because I know he's been watching a lot of Guirassy the last few days and has been in my DMs every maybe half an hour, just getting more and more amazed at how good his skill set has become.
Well, yeah, I don't get to watch a lot of other football. I'm sort of stuck watching West Ham all the time because we do Hamalytics and the West Ham breakdown. So I'm always sort of focusing on West Ham, and then you get a little break in West Ham games, and I get to go and catch up with different players that are doing really well. And Guirassy was like at the top of the list. Like, what the hell's happened here? I need to find out what's going on. Because as Cal said, like solid target man, right? That's what he's been for a long time in my mind, anyway. He's not at the start of his career at all, and yet, yeah, just kind of amazed by how well he's playing, and not really in the sense that, yeah, he's physical and he's doing a really good job as a target man. Just like he's just completely dominating the pitch. He's the best player on the pitch almost every time he steps onto it at the moment in the Bundesliga. It's ridiculously good. As Cal said, hold up play, facilitation play, aerial duels, finishing, runs in behind, dropping towards the ball. Kind of the whole package is where you would want it to be for a like elite top level number 9, which makes it all the more strange that it's kind of taken this long to click. And part of you then goes, is this a purple patch? Is this something where he's having the best form of his career, and then, you know, an injury happens? He's injured right now. It's a small injury, but you know, something interrupts that, and it falls away and it drops off, and you don't see the same kind of form again from that player. There's very little to suggest that in his game, because what I would look for around that anyway is just kind of the general ability, and how they kind of combine with teammates, not just particularly with strikers, because sometimes it's like, okay, yeah, they've scored a bunch of goals in recent games and they've just received good chances, but no, like the guy is creating his own chances half the time. He's doing everything you would want him to do. He's got everything you'd want a 9 at West Ham to have, really. That drifting out wide, the ability to come towards the ball, link, the ability to go in behind. Yeah, and unlike the other 2 guys where I was talking about creating separation and being good in those conditions, but not being perfectly comfortable on the last line, he has that too, and he's in complete control. He's been in complete control of all the centre-backs I've watched him against. He knows exactly where he wants the ball. He creates separation and then moves towards them, and then just dominates duels because of his frame and because of how good his anticipation is. And that's just an experienced target man who's pulled the other bits together at the same time and is now thriving, really, really thriving in the Bundesliga. I don't think he's going to be there for much longer. The problem is the list of clubs that are going to want him is, I mean, practically everyone is going to want this guy because of the form he's shown this season. That I don't think you would find a club in Europe that wouldn't be interested in Guirassy right now. He is playing so well. So yeah, he would be top of my list. But I mean, that's not particularly hard work for scouts anywhere right now. He's going to be the top of everyone's.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because of his age, right? And whenever I've spoken about transfers on the channel and with other people in the Patreon group chat or whatever, Tim Snyder comes up a lot, and this idea of Brighton comes up a lot. Those are the 2 things that people speak about non-stop. And what that ends up boiling down to is, wow, anyone over 24, that's probably like, that's a no-go, innit? That's just not going to happen. Or alternatively, that's a Moyes guy, this is other people, or whatever, all these sort of things. I think when you look at him, specifically Guirassy, and obviously like concerns about it being a purple patch or whatever aside, the release clauses is so little that actually that still represents value for money. Like, don't get me wrong, you're probably going to have to go ahead and pay him a hell of a large wage, but you're going to have to pay anyone a hell of a large wage. It's the Premier League. That's what they come to the Premier League for, is to earn a probably 6-figure salary at that point, right? I feel like there still represents like legitimate value for money. And I remember when we first moved to the Olympic Stadium, it's going back a long way now, we were in a similar scenario where we were getting linked to every striker under the sun, and there were all of these different people, and we were looking at Lacazette, and we're looking at Batshuayi, who were on the younger side, and all these other things. And then Carlos Bacca was just sat there, who was this guy who was in form at the time, ultimate bagsman. You pass him the ball, he puts it in the net, big times, fun, we love it, right? But everyone was talking about how it didn't really represent that good value for money because he was on the older side or whatever. But actually, you buy someone like that, even if you get 2 good seasons out of them, even if you get 1 good season out of them, really, at 18 months at that price, it's not exactly bad value for money. Actually, it's pretty flipping good. And having someone who you can sort of rely on to do bits alongside Antonio, who can exist sometimes, maybe. I don't know. Will he have legs? I don't know anymore. And then, you know, you could give you the time to go and look at who the next guy is, be it finding like loans for Divine and have him going out and doing his thing, or looking at, I don't know, one of the other people we spoke about, like Mamouche or someone else. Like, there's all these other younger people out there, and it sort of allows them to not have the pressure of having to come in and be the guy to perform instantaneously. And I kind of like that idea of Guirassy, someone who you can just rely on, as opposed to having to find someone who's 22 and actually has to step up straight away because Mikel Antonio is there, and then Jared Bowen is already sort of playing there, but all these other things, and they'd have to come in. I quite like that idea, despite his age. I think it, for me at least, when I look at it, and I don't know about you, Cal, but for me, it makes sense from every angle to me.
Yeah, 100%, and it would make sense to Brighton as well. I know people get excited about the young model and
Danny
the young
Welbeck,
players.
man.
Well, that's what I mean. Like,
Exactly. Spot on.
it's all about value for money for Brighton. It's not just about young players. Like, okay, yeah, they sign a lot of young players, particularly from South America, but that's because they represent good value for money, because the resale price for them is insane. But it's also not stopped them signing Adam Lallana and Danny Welbeck and getting a tune out of them as well, because they also represented good value for money, albeit at the other end of their career. But it's still a deal, and Brighton are always looking for deals, and they always get good deals. And I think Guirassy is the same. And I think the only other thing that I would add to Jack's very good roundup of what he's good at is, I think one of the big things that we've been critical of Antonio of at times is his security in possession. Is, yes, he's good with his back to goal. Yes, he's strong. Yes, he holds up well. And even like, okay, yeah, Guirassy is on form, the most clinical striker in the Bundesliga this season. He's got the best conversion rate of all attackers, but he's also got the best pass completion rate and the best dribble success rate. He's not doing loads of dribbles, but to my mind, that actually tells us more, is the fact that, yes, he's not ranking highly for dribbles in terms of volume, but the fact that he is the most accurate dribbler says to me that every decision he's making is the right one, because he's got the highest pass completion rate. So he knows exactly when to release it. He releases it well. He's not giving the ball up regularly at all. He's not constantly trying to take on his man, but when he does take on his man, he is the most accurate dribbler of all the strikers in the Bundesliga, which means, again, he's chosen that decision very well. He's also a very high volume shooter. And like I said, he's got the best conversion rate in the Bundesliga. So all of that, to me, the fact he's ranking in the top percentile for finishing, dribbling and passing, speaks, like Jack said, to a target man who has honed his craft over a good few seasons and has finally started to see it all fall into place. And now it just seems that he can't put a foot wrong. And I think, yes, okay, he's 27. But like you say, if you get four, I mean, Antonio was what, 30, 31 and still putting in decent shifts. And yeah, we've seen that at West Ham, and we've seen it in the Premier League. Like, if you've got quality, you've got quality. And I think if you can get 3-4 good seasons out of Guirassy at whatever the release clause is quoted as being, I think 15 million is what I saw. I don't know how accurate that is. That works out at, let's say he has 3 good seasons, 5 million a season for a top clinical goal scorer. Like, that is incredible value for money. So yeah, I echo what Jack said. I think Guirassy would be my top target, both in terms of being able to come in and fulfill, I think, the role that we'd require of him, but also add so much more and improve on some of the key weaknesses that we've had at striker at West Ham for a while. But the big issue is, obviously, you've got a lot of other clubs looking for that clinical bagsman, potentially this January, maybe in summer. And when you're potentially competing with the likes of a United or an Arsenal or whoever for this, even Chelsea for this, particularly when the deal's so cut price, it's going to be difficult to convince him, I think. But we've got to at least be in the race, I'd say.
Yeah, two more things on this. 27 is different to 31. And that's as simple as the conversation around his age is for me. You know, I think he's got a very long time still at a good level. So I don't think the age is a big issue at all. And when you're looking at age profile, like comparing someone who's 27 to 22, you're factoring basically for the 22-year-old. It's not length of time at that point. You're factoring the potential of the 22-year-old to usurp the 27-year-old. I mean, the level that Guirassy's at right now, none of the 22-year-olds that we're looking at are going to get better than Guirassy is right now. So I don't see the conversation really about his age. Secondarily, even if it is a purple patch, even if he does struggle to reproduce the form he has this season at another club, you're probably still going to get the decent target man that he was before. And I'm kind of fine with that for the level that the release clause is anyway. Like, I would be fine with having a guy that does the job that Guirassy was doing before he hit this level of form, full 15 million euros. Like, that is good value to me as well. And one of the things I'm really keen for us to do at striker is not to be too distracted by like the notion of like really needing someone who can hit an incredible level. Just want someone who can do a job physically, like more than anything else, because we have good attackers around the striker. So I don't need the striker to be, you know, there's always this talk about like the 20 goal a season guy looking for that 50 million pound player that's going to completely transform your team and take you into the Champions League. Yeah, that's great. We've got a lot of other good players. As long as the striker can hold the ball up, deal with the battle with centre backs, and be a threat in the box, I'm kind of fine, because I know that players like Bowen, like Kudus, like Souček are going to pick up decent goal totals every season, as long as we're facilitating them by playing the way that we have done so far this season, rather than doing whatever the hell we were trying to do last season. So yeah, to me, this is the kind of deal that makes sense, and this is the kind of striker I'm most interested in. Physical unit, threat in the box, anything else, big bonus.
Yeah, I'm here for it. Obviously, there are lots of other people we've been spoken about in just the world in general, and you guys will be breaking it down, I'm certain, both on analyticsunited.co.uk and also the West Ham Breakdown, amazing podcast that I listen to when I go to the shops every single time, and I would highly recommend. It's on all good podcast platforms and some bad ones. Pick and choose which ones you think are bad. It's fine. You can make those ones up amongst yourselves. But Jack, Cal, anything left? Anything else you want to say before we were to end?
No, just tune into the pod to catch the rest of the names that we're going through. We're recording it tomorrow, so yeah, we'll have a few more strikers that we like adding on there, and some probably lesser known shouts to go with.
Yeah, no, echo that. And the only other thing is that the longer I sit here and look at myself, the more I realise I'm actually morphing into Jack, despite him being younger than me. So I think I need a haircut.
I'm here for it.
I got
that
crazy.
I think
I need a haircut, or Jack needs a
other.
moustache. It's one or the
other. We should totally do that, by the way, at some point.
I feel like next time we do, like next month when we end up doing one of these all together or whatever, if you just both came dressed in the exact same clothes, exact same mustache, exact same hair, I would be. I personally, don't know about everyone else. I personally would be very, very excited by that prospect. I think it's good, you know, good info, good looks. What more do we need? What more do we need? Thanks for watching, everyone. Subscribe if you're new around here. Make sure to like the video and hit that bell notification so you don't miss out on any future videos. Until then, cheers, everyone. Bye.